I'm 103 years old. Saying that out loud still feels strange, like I'm borrowing someone else's number. Most of the people who knew me when I was young are gone now, and the rooms I live in are quieter than I ever imagined they would be. When you live this long, time stops feeling like a river and starts feeling like a room you've already walked through, slowly, one step at a time, without realizing you were nearing the door. It took me 76 years to understand something simple, painfully simple. I didn't learn it because I was foolish or reckless. I learned it because I was careful, because I did what made sense, because I thought there would always be more time. At my age, people like to ask what the secret is. Longevity, diet, attitude. I usually smile and shrug, because the truth is I don't know why I'm still here. But I do know why so many moments aren't. And that's what stays with me now, in the quiet hours, when the day has nothing left to ask of me. When you're young, time feels wide. It stretches out in front of you like a long road, and you assume you'll stop at all the interesting places eventually. You don't rush. You don't linger either. You just keep moving, because moving feels like living. I grew up in a house where being responsible mattered more than being happy. Not because my parents were cruel, but because that's how survival worked then. You worked, you saved, you didn't complain, you didn't dwell. Love was shown in meals cooked, clothes mended, bills paid on time. Feelings were something you kept tidy, like a drawer you didn't open unless you had to. So I learned early to be useful, to be reliable, to be the person others could lean on. And I was proud of that. I still am, in some ways. But usefulness has a way of filling every corner of your life, if you let it. I married young, not because I was swept away, but because it seemed right. He was kind, steady. He worked hard. He didn't drink too much. He didn't raise his voice. Those were important things then. Love, I thought, would grow around that stability, like ivy on a wall. And it did for a while, or maybe it didn't, and I just didn't notice the difference. We built a life the way people did in those days. Slowly, carefully, children came. Responsibilities multiplied. Days became lists of things that needed doing. I was always tired, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that made you feel earned at the end of the day. I told myself there would be time later, time to talk, time to travel, time to sit and ask questions that didn't have immediate answers. Time to rest in the presence of the people I loved instead of constantly tending to the structure around us. Later became my favorite word. I used it without thinking. Later, when things calm down. Later, when the kids are older. Later, when work isn't so demanding. Later, when we're not so tired. Later has a very gentle voice. It doesn't feel like a lie when you hear it. In my 40s, I started to feel a faint sense of distance in my own life. Not unhappiness, exactly. More like watching myself from a few steps away. I noticed conversations becoming shorter, touch becoming more functional. Laughter still happened, but it felt scheduled, like something we did because we remembered it was important. I remember one evening, washing dishes, listening to the sound of water hitting the sink and realizing I couldn't remember the last time I'd sat still with my husband without a task between us. No plate, no plan, no problem to solve. The thought passed. I dried my hands. I moved on. That's how most losses begin, quietly, without announcement. People think regret comes from big mistakes, affairs, abandonment, explosions, but my regrets are smaller than that. They're made of moments I postponed, Words I softened until they disappeared, questions I didn't ask because I didn't want to disturb the peace. Peace can be a very expensive thing. The children grew and left as they should. They called, they visited, they had their own lives, full and loud and demanding. I was proud of them, I still am. But pride doesn't keep you company at night. My husband aged beside me, the way you don't notice a tree growing until suddenly it's tall and you can't remember when that happened. He became quieter. I assumed it was tiredness, or contentment, or simply age. We were good at not making trouble. We were excellent at coexistence. When he got sick, it wasn't dramatic. No sudden collapse. Just a slow narrowing of the world, appointments, medications, adjustments. I stepped into caretaking the way I'd stepped into everything else, automatically, competently. I don't regret caring for him. I regret that it took his illness to make us speak honestly again. There were things he said to me in those last years that I wish I'd heard decades earlier, and things I said to him that felt heavy in my mouth, like words I'd been carrying too long. We loved each other, I know that, but love left unattended changes shape. It doesn't disappear, it just becomes quieter, harder to recognize. When he died, I didn't fall apart. That surprised people. It surprised me too. I grieved, of course, still do. But what broke me wasn't his absence. It was the finality of everything we hadn't done together. Grief isn't only about missing someone. Sometimes it's about missing who you were supposed to be with them. After he was gone, the days stretched. Friends dwindled, some passed, some moved, some simply faded. At a certain age, your world gets smaller, not because you want it to, but because there are fewer people left who remember the earlier versions of you. That's when the lesson finally settled in, not as a sharp realization, but as a slow ache that refused to leave. I understood then that life isn't shortened by tragedy as often as it's shortened by postponement, by the belief that meaning can always be deferred. 76 years it took me to see that clearly. I thought I was being patient. I thought I was being responsible. I thought I was building something solid enough to enjoy later. But later isn't guaranteed. And even when it arrives, you don't come to it as the same person. Energy changes, courage changes, people change. There are conversations you can only have when you're young enough to risk them. There are embraces that feel different before bodies become cautious. There are dreams that require a kind of foolishness you don't get back once you've trained yourself to be sensible. I don't say this with bitterness. I had a good life, truly. There was warmth, there was purpose, there was love, even if it was sometimes quiet and folded away. But I wish I had understood sooner that presence is not something you earn after finishing your obligations. It's something you practice while you're still in them. If I could sit across from my younger self, I wouldn't warn her about mistakes. I wouldn't tell her to be braver or louder or different. I would tell her to stop assuming she'll return to moments she's already in. I would tell her that relationships don't fade from neglect alone. They fade from being treated as permanent fixtures instead of living things. I would tell her that being needed is not the same as being known. And I would tell her that rest is not laziness, and joy is not a reward for suffering. They are parts of life, not destinations. Now, at 103, my days are simple. I sit by the window. I watch light move across the floor. I remember. Some memories are sweet, some still sting. Most are ordinary, and that's what makes them precious. I don't have many regrets about what I did. My regrets are about what I delayed. If this means something to you, if it settles uncomfortably somewhere in your chest, don't rush to fix your life. Just notice where you keep saying later and ask yourself gently what it might cost you, because time doesn't announce when it's done giving. It just grows quiet, and one day you realize the room you've been walking through has fewer doors than you thought. I know that now. I know it deeply, and it's the one thing I wish I had learned while there was still more of the road ahead.